Hello! So this is part 2. If you have not watched part 1, go back and watch it. So we just finished talking about conflict styles, so let's move on to factors that impact how we deal with conflict. Okay? So the goals, short-term and long-term, we wish to achieve. So sometimes our short-term goals are just to figure, I keep bringing this up, but this could still be a conflict. Sometimes our short-term goals are literally just to figure out what we're going to do for dinner, or just to figure out what we're going to watch on Netflix, or, whatever. Okay? So if that's your goal, you might not be in the mood to have this long debate of like, well, last week we did this and I'm really not in the mood for this, or blah, 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 but if it's more of a long-term goal, then that might affect how you deal with conflict. Okay? The next one is our emotional state. So, and y'all know this, right? Are you in a bad mood? How many of you get hangry? I do. My poor husband knows that, right? And I'm not saying that's an excuse, or it might even be, let's go positive. It's always easy to go to the dramatic negative. It might even be, you're having a good day. It's nice outside and you're like, nothing's going to get me down. So, and then something that someone cuts you off and you might be like, that's fine, instead of like confronting them or something. But also don't be that person that like gets out of the car. Anyway, our cognitive assessment of the situation. So how do we cognitively, not emotionally, how do we cognitively view the situation? So for example, maybe who started the conflict, maybe how we define what fair means, okay? Our personality and communication competence. So our personality, some people are just predisposed, I know like nature versus nurture, but just based on our personality, there are people that just naturally don't like conflict and avoid it. And then there are people who welcome it, and then communication competence. So learning skills and having that competence to be able to, for example, I versus you statements that we talked about with verbal communication. And then our family history. Our family history is incredibly, incredibly important for how we deal with conflict. It is almost scary how much our family of origin, or whoever raised you, I should say, plays into our behaviors and our psychology and how we turn out, which is so scary that I'm having a child and I'm like paranoid that I'm going to ruin her. But our family history has a huge deal of influence on how we handle conflict. Okay. That could be, and a lot of it is subconscious. So I'm not saying that you can't change, but if you were raised with, and even if you hate it, right? Like maybe growing up, you hated that your parents would argue constantly and call each other names when they were arguing, but then you hear yourself do it to your friends. You're like, wait, why is that coming out of my mouth? Okay. All right. So, the PUGS model is something that I learned and was taught when I went to Texas State and when I was a TA, and I've carried it over. So I'm not taking ownership of this. I'm not taking credit for this. I did not come up with it, but I do teach it to you because I think it's very easy for us to just say like, oh, handle conflict effectively. What is that? Okay, cool. What does that mean? Okay. So we are going to go through the PUGS model one by one. Okay, so there it is at a glance. Let's go over it one by one. The first step of the P is describe the problem. Okay, describe the other person's behavior rather than evaluate the person. Use I statements, not you statements. That should sound familiar. And self-disclose your emotions and feelings. So that way they can have a better understanding of what you're feeling, why you're frustrated, why you feel like there is an issue or whatever. Okay. So first, describe the problem. Then the next step is achieve understanding. Okay. So attempt to achieve mutual, I'm going to go through these kind of fast. Attempt to achieve mutual understanding by responding to the following questions. Do you understand why I believe there is a problem? Do you understand why I feel this way? Okay. Now, The very, very key thing with this step is if you do not reach understanding, both of you understanding what the problem is, you cannot move on. Okay? We do sometimes, and that might be why you're thinking, as I tell y'all constantly as we go through this stuff, I hope that you're thinking about your life and your experiences and reflecting, but we do, so I'm not saying we can't, but we shouldn't. We shouldn't move forward, and that might be why there are some conflicts that have never gotten resolved, because if they don't even understand why you're frustrated, how are we going to make the efforts to move on, and how are you going to know that you've even resolved it if they don't even understand why there's a conflict in the first place? Okay? Another important thing to keep in mind is understanding isn't about being right. You can understand where someone is coming from, or at least understand that there's an issue, that they are frustrated that you leave your stuff out in your living room and kitchen that you share with your roommate. That doesn't mean that you have to agree. Okay? So this step is incredibly, incredibly important. Okay? So that's why I have the quote, I don't get why you're so mad. It's not a big deal. If you are hearing that come out of the other person's mouth, or maybe if you're the person that's saying that, you have not reached understanding. Again, when we say understanding, it's not about like, okay, yeah, you're right, I should have done this or whatever. That's not what we're talking about here. Okay? It's just understanding that there is an issue. All right. The next step is identify goals. Okay? I know this sounds really, really corny, but two things. So number one, y'all might already do this and not realize that you're identifying goals. Number two, you don't even have to open a self-help book to know that if you don't even know what the goal is, what the outcome is, how are you going to know if you're there? How are you going to know if you have finished the conflict, that the conflict is over? Okay? So let's go back to the first one. Y'all might already do this. So I know on the slide it might sound really corny, and maybe all of these sound corny as I talk about them, but this really is realistic, y'all. And this really is something that you can keep in your back pocket for a guide of how to handle conflict. I don't expect you to be like, all right, let's see, what step are we on? You know, like, come on, okay? But so when I say identify goals, that might be you and your romantic partner are having issues, and, you know, someone is like, okay, well, I don't want to break up. And you're like, me neither. You just identified a goal. So whatever it is that you figure out, by the end of this, the end result isn't going to be you breaking up. Okay? So when we say identify goals, it doesn't have to be like, well, my goal is to be happy. Well, my goal, you know, like, it can be. I'm not making fun of that. It can be like, what's your goal? Well, my goal is to have peace when I come home. You know, you're my roommate. We don't have to be friends, but I don't want to be afraid to come home or dread coming home. You know, like, you can literally put it in these factors of these terms, but you don't have to. Y'all already probably establish goals without realizing that that's what you're doing. Okay? All right. The first S in PUGS is brainstorm solutions. Okay? So generate multiple solutions, withhold evaluation or judgment until the brainstorming session is over. So that's really, really important. I'm not saying that we're all, you know, sensitive little snowflakes that can't handle any evaluation, but think about even the mere annoyance of when you're like, all right, where do you want to go out to eat? Chipotle? No. Literally anything sounds good. Okay. Do you want to order a pizza? Oof, no. Okay, you know, like, even if it's not personal, even if your heart isn't in it, it's still frustrating when people just shut the ideas down and don't even give the idea, because then what do? Okay, well, then you pick something, right? So withhold judgment and evaluation until the brainstorming session is over, and then piggyback off of each other's ideas. So, you know, you want to make sure that you're using their ideas. Okay, maybe not this, but, oh, what if we do this? Okay. And then the last step is select the best solution. So evaluate each solution without evaluating the person who provided the solution. And that can be kind of hard. So let's say you're in a long distance relationship and you are trying to figure out like a traveling schedule. And so, you know, when you're evaluating the solution, you don't want to say, oh, of course, it's convenient that, for 3 months I would be the one coming to you and you would come to me 2 months. That, that's not going to be helpful. Okay. That's not going to be helpful. Don't make it personal. Evaluate the actual solution without the person, without bringing into, whether you think they have a hidden agenda or not. How well does each solution meet the identified goals? Select the best solution for the both of you. Okay. So again, I know I went over that kind of quick, but it is really, really helpful to have this in your back pocket. And I can tell you, that it's been helpful for me to, for the conflicts that aren't just a quick, well, that frustrated me. That was kind of crappy that you said that. I've told y'all when we moved here from Texas that it was very hard for my husband and I. At the time we weren't married, we were dating, but he took a job here and it was a discussion because for him it wasn't like, all right, well, I'm going to take this job. Like, what are you going to do? We knew that we had a future together. So it was really, what are we going to do? And that, those big decisions, it wasn't a one-time conversation. I can promise you that. It was something we talked about for almost a few months of deciding, okay, well, if we don't move, I don't want to resent you. And then I was like, well, if we do move, I don't want to resent you. And it, all of that stuff that can come with a big decision. And, so I know that this might not be practical for all of you and even for every situation. I'm not saying to pull this out in every single conflict, but when it is one of those big conflicts or a long-term thing that you're trying to decide, or even if it's a small conflict that you just can't grasp or, can't figure out why you haven't been able to settle this might be something to take out and to think about, wow, that's why, because we haven't reached understanding, or because we haven't established our goals of what that end result is going to look like, or we haven't taken the time to brainstorm solutions. We're both just stuck complaining about what's going on. Okay. So, this model again is something that I teach because I think it's good to have a solid idea of, okay, so handle conflict, but how do I even do that? Sometimes it's when the conflict is big and complex enough, it can be confusing on where to even begin. Okay. All right. That's part 2. And we're going to start part 3 right now.